everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unfazed Under Fire. I'm David Craig Utz, and I'm your host and moderator for the show. And this week, we're fortunate again to have Anatoly Yakorev back with us for another program. We're going to have a very powerful conversation about what's possible where we left off last time, which is what's possible for leaders as they develop to higher stages of leadership. And for those of you that didn't make that broadcast, let me just give you a little bit of background on Anatoly. So Anatoly, you are a seasoned ethics and compliance practitioner. You've launched an organization called World Without Corruption, where you're basically utilizing regulated technology and the human spirit with the goal to eradicate corruption from the world, which is a pretty big task these days. And then you're up to it. And early in your career, you spent 20 years working in the C-suite at BP and Amoco, including with Bob Dudley, who was the CEO of BP at the time. And you work with me as a partner to help in the development of the executives that I work with through your Neuro Reset. And I'm hoping that we'll get a little bit of chance to talk about that today. But also, I think you've made a recent move to Montenegro. So tell me what took you to Montenegro and how did that all unfold?
Yes, well, that was a tough decision, but because of this unfolding humanitarian catastrophe, and that heinous war going on and all that, with my family being in Ukraine, I could no longer physically and morally stay back in Russia. So I decided just to, go enjoy my friends in Montenegro. And from that point on, to see what I can do to help the situation.
Very good. Well, Godspeed. I'm glad you're safe in Montenegro, and hopefully we get you over here to the United States at some point sooner than later. So, and thanks for being with me today. So last time we spoke, we talked about the intersection of leadership, trust, and ethics. And during that conversation, we touched on the nature of leadership, not only the nature of leadership itself, but the nature of leadership in the world today, and mentioned that there's still a very large contingent that still defaults to an autocratic style of leadership that really drives results through fear. That's the easiest way to say what autocrats do. That said, what we also agreed is far better to generate higher quality results, to retain talent, to improve well-being is a more enlightened approach to leading. So I thought that we would bring you back on to talk about that a little bit more and explore this more enlightened approach to leadership. And, to me, that's one that has a strong sense of executive presence. The leader is bringing that presence into the room with them when they're, or in every interaction. Tend to be more visionary and strategic. They tend to have more exceptional conversational intelligence when they're engaging in conversation. They're listening, they're asking questions. They're not just bringing their directive in. They're trying to make their ideas better through listening to others. And they do a good job of creating alignment and retaining talent. People like to work for these kinds of leaders, which is important. And the end result, of course, is to maximize their ability to create value and generate outstanding results. So as we dive into all that, into this more enlightened approach to leadership, I thought it would be good for us to kind of step back and ask some more fundamental questions that are foundational to understanding what enlightened leadership is. So at the most profound level, the first question I have, and we can maybe banter back and forth on this, is what is the potential of a human's development? I mean, if you look at it, if you bore it down and said, okay, give me some ideas about what that potential looks like, what would you say to that?
Well, it's always best to take a step back and look how that leadership development unfolded. Back in the days of, me being with BP, I remember that those days, they would only look at some leading business schools like INSEAD or Thunderbird and say, hey, we'll just take those leaders, send them off there. They will learn whatever is necessary. They'll come back and they will reignite the spirit of the company. So that was a very simplified approach those days. But right now we know that the role of those business schools, especially against the backdrop of what we are going through right now on a global basis, it has come down quite considerably, because the type of challenges and the nature of those challenges leaders are faced with today is out of line with what business schools normally produce. They're lagging behind like, a decade. So the human potential, right? This is interesting. The human potential is being tested right now because of the unpredictable nature of these challenges and disruption on multiple levels. So that's why I think we have to reevaluate the human potential, what we can test and what is getting broken in the process,
Right.
because of the human psyche can take only this much. And our leaders, business leaders, who suddenly have to be, able to do a lot of things they were not taught to do. So now, probably just going back and looking at that potential. Now, this brings up a question. Are they utilizing their full potential or not?
Right. Well, doesn't the human potential go beyond the psychology? And obviously, psychology is important. Our thinking brain is important, but our potential lies deeper in a certain way than our psyche and our psychology and our personality. So, if you were to say, where is this potential located in the human being? What would you say to that? I mean, and what happens when that potential begins to be unlocked? That makes it easier for people to deal with all the BS that's going on today and all the things that are coming at them right now. Consequences, circumstances, the realities are pushing in. It's almost like I'm thinking in Star Wars when they were in that trash chute and Luke was trying to get out of there with his friends, and the walls were closing in on them.
Yeah.
The force came to their rescue. What is the force in the human spirit that allows you to kind of hold yourself up against those things and not be so affected?
Yes. I mean, it's a very good question because, the huge, or let's say giant industry of self-development, they keep talking about how you can become a better version of yourself, how you can unlock all that potential that's in you. But, the answer to that is pretty, how would I put that? We just have to really look deep inside, and nobody wants to do that because
Yes.
we'll be going all the way back to our early childhood, with all the trauma involved, with all the bad stuff that happened to us that we managed to dress up and, mask for ourselves. But
Right.
this is the hurdle that really stands in the way of any potential development. Because if you don't revisit the stuff that's holding you back, there's no way you can, mentally and psychologically and emotionally bulletproof yourself to deal with the challenges at hand. So that's what I think is happening right now, because everybody's trying to help leaders dress up their wounds and say, hey, come on, forget about this. How about you engage in some nice activities to make you feel more powerful? But that's
Right.
what you mentioned. That's a lot of BS that, goes into, inside the industry that goes on and sort of like impacts all their solutions. They
Right.
just basically scratch on the surface.
Right.
And that's actually doing more like a disservice to our leaders who are already groaning under the pressures.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we're going into all the things that kind of the current environment, and I want to get also into how organizations and even the self-help and coaching industry has done a disservice, which you've pointed to with some of the programs that these leaders go to that's in that territory. As I look at the potential for what's possible in a human being, it's the sky's the limit for me. To me, if you look at, for example, Bob Anderson's research of the leadership circle, where he talked about different stages of development of the human being, from egocentric to reactive to creative to I think it's unitive, and then there's one above that. As the human being rises in that stage, I would call of maturity, and it's usually a seasoning of their awareness or a seasoning of a connection to their awareness, that something's possible, that you see people that operate at those higher levels, creative and above, that are able to almost be bulletproof from the circumstances. Not that they're not their physical experience may still be affected. They still have to take care of their physical experience, but there's something in them that is not so caught up by all the gaslighting and this people, even the corruption that's in front of them. They don't put up with that, right? There's a certain something that happens within a human being that galvanizes them and creates a steely resolve that comes from within them, right? They can't explain. They didn't get it from going to a class or going to work with a coach. They found it within themselves somehow. And it's in the idea of how that magically unfolds. That's what I think, the self-help in the coaching industry and the training industry has been trying to go after, the universities. How do we unpack that potential in human beings? But it appears to me that we tried to unpack it in the left hemisphere of the brain, that somehow we believe the executive function is the ruler, right? So what has the self-help and coaching industry gotten wrong about helping people raise to those higher levels of consciousness and awareness, which relates directly to leadership? Going back to Bob Anderson's research, that his saying is a growth in consciousness that actually ignites the higher levels of maturity and development in the human being, including leadership. So what has the self-help and coaching industry gotten wrong about it? What would you say to that?
Well, first off, we just have to understand this, the self-help, industry, has to compensate for all the poor, shoddy job done by parenting, educational, societal, everything. So can you imagine? So you're asking for a silver bullet. Okay, so here's that silver bullet or a magic pill. You swallow it, and all that trash that you were, being part of, from the early days in your life, throughout your life, will magically disappear.
Right.
And you will be empowered as a human being, just like a Superman. Now, is it possible? Yes, it is. It is possible. But the industry are looking for ways to make it work in a very, easy manner so that they can, let's put it this way. They're trying to use a mental approach to figure out what was wrong and explain to people, but it doesn't work that way. Because even if you're educated about a certain experience in your life, like if you, for example, had a spiritual experience and then you're educated, okay, yes, you've got two things to connect. But if you don't have that profound experience and you're being educated on something you have no idea about, it just doesn't stick. So this is, I think, where the entire industry, no matter how complex and, encouraging and inspirational they become, it only touches in a very fleeting manner on our emotions, but it doesn't lead to any profound change. And then we're left with what we started, So this is, I think, where the industry got it wrong. Okay, but then there are some other, ideas they're playing with, because they're saying, okay, we understand that maybe we need to sprinkle in some magic dust to cause some deeper changes. Hence, talking about microdosing, certain things that you go for, you start experimenting with things, right? It's almost like, okay, medication or being medicated is one of the things that you have to get the right drugs in your system so that you can unlock your potential chemically. Well, it's very challenging stuff. Very.
It's what I hear pretty much. What I hear from if I can summarize, you can tell me if I'm on top point. In certain ways, the self-help, and I would even say my own profession, has gotten some of the conceptual nature of it right. So they point people in the right direction. They might even give people an understanding of a particular pathway they can follow to eradicate some of that trauma or stay focused in a positive way, to be the whole thing about positive thinking. That's true. If you're in a more positive frame of mind, you're going to have more potentially positive outcomes, right? But what happens is the person gets caught up in the buzzsaw of their past or the buzzsaw of their habits. And we've all seen this. We try to make changes and we go back and notice when we're doing the same habits that we've always done over and over again. So it's in a certain way, I would say that's over complexified the process in a certain way, because it's actually rather simple, although it takes time, which you're pointing to. There's not, we got to talk about silver bullet here in a second, but what aspects, would you concur with what I just said? Did you that they've maybe gotten some things right, but they've stated more heady and given understanding, and that's like 2% of what has to be taken into account to make the kind of changes that they promise with these books and programs, etc.
Well, it's interesting because, yeah, I mean, there's a bit of another element, here at play because, okay, they do promise a lot of stuff, but it's on our psychology. If it doesn't work, we blame ourselves, right? I read that book, maybe I didn't get the gist of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's where the industry builds off that. Okay, you didn't get it right. So so that's one of the issues. Okay, that's one of the issues.
That's a great point.
Now but because you see again, it's a sleight of hand that the industry is playing with you. Oh, there are lots of good thinkers out there. You listen to them, you agree with them for 2 seconds, and then you don't act on it, you don't integrate it in your life or your stuff you do. And that's it. This is your problem. Now, the second element of it is very interesting. Yes, let's assume there are lots of self-help books and various courses and everything, but it attracts only a very particular type of neurotypical people, right? Who look for structured ways to deal with whatever they've got inside. But then there are like simplified tools on the surface, like, okay, just meditate daily, embrace mindfulness, start some yoga classes, go and, start jogging in the morning. Yes, all of that is valid to a degree because you're not looking at the long-term commitment, because you can reap what you have sown only after several years, if not decades. And we're talking about the type of commitment that not everybody is ready for, because they're being torn between what they have to deliver. All their roles as a parent, as an executive, as a friend, all of those roles right now, they're being challenged on multiple levels. So I'll just touch on 2, which means that, okay, we're looking at the long-term commitment we're not being so sure if the results will be the results we think we should get, right? And then basically, I want to touch on the third one. These days, it has become quite prevalent that even the coaching and therapy industry, they embraced, covert psychological manipulation of people, by pushing the right buttons to get and generate the results they want. Now, this is another problem, which again, nobody wants to talk about, because you see, it's almost like everybody thinks like if we just, you probably have heard about a behavioral nudging, like we'll nudge people in the right direction. But wait a minute, who determined that direction is right? So now suddenly everybody is using a system of nudges, but they're doing that covertly, which means like you've never subscribed to that, right? But it has become so prevalent that people just go with the flow. And all of a sudden, you just find yourself that you're being manipulated by so many for your own good, except maybe it's not really in your best interests. So that's really a challenge these days.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I think that while there's certainly people that many coaches that I respect that do really good work with their clients, I think there's a large percentage of people that are just learning stuff from their programs and just trying to layer it on to their clients. So I've learned this. This is the way you go about becoming a better version of yourself. I've learned this through this XYZ coaching program. Now I'm going to instigate this with you. So it is true. I mean, and the idea that, really the goal for me with my clients, number one, is to get to know themselves and who they are. And the reason I use the direction I use is so that that happens. Because I think one of the things that the self-help industry has not done is talk. They do talk about the goal of their various practices and focus, but not the ultimate goal of unlocking the potential, which is really to understand who you really are beyond personal your personality. That there's something deeper than that. And that's so it's kind of like what I've seen over the years, and I got caught up in that dance myself. Like there's this in-between land that we develop leaders in, which is kind of semi-spiritual and semi-practical and semi this way, because we want to dance a little gingerly because we don't want to go too far. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we've connected what we're doing to you producing results. So we're dancing in your world, but we're trying to do that through some other things, and we're mixing it together rather than being direct about what the deal is, the real deal is, which is understanding there's something deeper within us that when it gets ignited, makes everything in our system work better.
Yeah.
Right.
But I have to, yeah, I just have to point out one thing. People, especially the ones who become quite successful in what they do, they still want to do the dance, but not to get into the area where you have to become, hard direct. That's how I learned it. When I raised once an issue of personal ethics with one CFO of a very large company, and he pushed me back vigorously. It's like, well, let's not talk about that. I said, okay, fine, I understand that. But people, as they grow, right, they always like the idea that, okay, I can control the boundaries of where I should go to learn more about myself, right? But I want to do it on my own terms. So I set the terms.
Yes,
But
this
is the
because it's
vicious
their
circle.
life. It's their life,
Exactly.
right?
Oh yeah. So, and people who are drunk on power, especially, they keep getting themselves drunk on their own power in their own eyes. So that's why they get totally confused about.
Well, it's intoxicating. It's the most.
Yes.
Isn't power one of the most intoxicating things that there is to the human ego? I mean, it is better than booze or any cocaine you could take.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it fills you up in a certain way that makes it's almost kind of like a placebo, unfortunately, because when that happens, then that individual starts causing harm around them when it gets too bad, right? It goes back to the autocratic style and the leading with fear that we talked about earlier, and that's really the choice, So if I'm to understand, to go towards my greatest potential as human being, and then maybe we could talk a little bit about neuro reset. I'd like to talk a little bit about what do you see as the major fundamental mechanisms in the human being that must be addressed if potential is to be reached at a higher level. So how would you speak about the mechanisms? I mean, we have awareness, we have the brain, we have emotional experience, we have physical experience, we have spiritual experience. What mechanisms need to be engaged earnestly, before we get to talking about the reset? Like if somebody's going to go on a path and they say, I don't want the silver bullet, I want to do it genuinely, and they're earnest in their question, what would you say is what they have to do to begin to unfold that potential within them?
Yeah, well, the answer is on the surface. So there are ways that are already established, because you see, somebody thinks like, I'm so unique, I've got my own way.
Right.
That the best example, that we can get is Mr. Putin. He thinks about himself. He's so unique. There's only his way, and that's why he's making that way for Russia now, right? Because Russia's got its own way, and you see it leads to, a real catastrophe, this existential crisis for everybody involved. So this is the
We have
danger when
identity
people.
politics, or identity politics is a similar thing, right? Everybody,
That's right.
what gender are you, or not gender, or whatever that is, it's identity. What, where do you come from? It's you get locked in identity. That's to be honored and respected. From wow, look at what look what nature created. All this variety, but at the same time, if we get so connected to like, I'm this kind of tree, and
Yeah,
I look at how amazing I am, we almost, in a certain way, lose touch with that which actually leads us to greater potential.
that's right. That's right.
Right.
But basically, like anybody would probably the best example would be Eckhart Tolle, right? Because of his personal spiritual experience, he has been totally transformed within and wrote great books. And people who are on that path, have
Right.
become appreciative of all the insights he shared through his books. But that's just one example, which I'm trying to use here as an example. Okay, so any deep experience, whether spiritual or emotional, but like really deep experience that causes a person to think about that deep inner change in them and then act on it, will be more than enough. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is keep reading fancy books, right?
Right.
Maybe, talk to other people, and then you never get close enough to shake your system out of that slumber that your system is locked in. So that's sort of like a normal path, a standard
Right.
path for people. It takes decades until they turn 50, look back, and then they realize I can no longer go, with all the junk attached to my psyche, my my
Right.
inner system. I have to do something about it.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I think this is where it's really challenging, and that it is so. In my experience, being on a spiritual path for 30 years, for studying, to be a coach, organizational development, it's psychology, all the things that I've studied, and I was looking for the Holy Grail for many, many years. When the Holy Grail was right in front of my face, but it was too boring to look at, which is simply awareness. We have to do. We're going to have to do a show on just that subject, because it's so much more powerful than people are aware of. Well, just use that word again. But the idea is that that's our true nature, right? Descartes' error. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." Well, no. If I can't be aware, I can't even know I'm thinking. So awareness is primary. So why don't we have more interest in that? Well, that requires. That's why self-help points to mindfulness and meditation. There's a reason for it, but they never talk about the real reason. They just said, if you just do this, you'll get better at it. But what are you focusing on when you're in those practices? So anyway, but what are some, what do you see as means to activate that internal resource? What would you say is those? And then we can talk a little bit about the cost of not taking action on engaging those resources and the cost of doing it. But what would you see as the fundamental internal resources we have to engage to grow our potential?
well, let's put it this way. I mean, you already mentioned it. It's
Yeah.
the level of awareness we just
Right.
have to embrace. But to get there, we need to completely, disconnect ourselves from anything that distracts us. So
Right.
you can't just like wake up one morning and just be mindful and stay in the present and be aware. It
It
just
takes
doesn't
work.
happen until
It
you,
takes effort.
well, it's either takes work or you understand the mechanism, that,
Right. And
okay,
you stay with the
first
mechanism. You
you have
stay in
to
the
embrace,
mechanism, right? Right. You stay in awareness as much as possible,
absolutely. So,
even through activity. Right.
yeah, yes, but for example, people say the right stuff. For example, even when they teach the essentials of well-being at the universities, like the Yale University, they just like launched various programs on well-being. Well, it's very simple. For example, it's hard, but it's very simple. You start with a very profound quality, like gratitude, right?
Right.
And like there are lots of stories about people who were writing like those gratitude letters, or they were going and like trying to really rectify, like undo the harm they did onto others before, but they were doing that through that mechanism of gratitude. It's a very simple and probably the
Very
most
powerful.
powerful, very powerful.
Very
Okay,
powerful.
because once you set your foot on that path, then you get more clarity about your own mission and about your own identity on that mission, and about
Right.
the journey that will take you there, and about your purpose. So it's very simple. Actually, it's 3, 4 elements, but it takes a very genuine effort.
Right.
You know, you almost have to try to be very authentic and very candid about your own efforts to do that, just with yourself. You don't
Right.
owe it to anybody else. Just do it to
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about consistency being the mother of trust, and so it's also consistency is the mother of practice, right? You have to be consistent with it, and it has to be, what I've learned, it can't be because you're trying to obtain a higher potential. This is the paradox with it. It has to be through the sheer enjoyment of doing it, and the gratitude even of having the ability to sit and be quiet for 45 minutes in the day. Like, how many people in the world have that opportunity, and just being able to be with that. But again, what you have to do, going back to your point, is you have to go through some briar patches and some brambles and some thorny bushes to get to that silent place inside yourself, because all of us have had things we've taken on in our life, various traumas, various, baggage and stuff like that. And the challenge, of course, they never talk about in the spiritual path is that once you launch on the path and you may have that awakening or that experience of your heart opening or whatever, then you go on that's like the teaser to get you on the path, and then you have to deal with the cleanup.
Yeah,
And you have to face the cleanup of it. And
yeah.
and when we as we come back, and we have executives listening to this podcast, they're clearly pretty busy folks, and they don't necessarily have an aspiration necessarily. They see they want to have a greater potential in themselves, but they don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to go off and live in an ashram for a period of time, or go off to to Sedona and spend time there, or do whatever. They have a busy life. So you've developed this neuro reset mechanism and process that takes that out of the equation. It sounds a little bit to those that might be listening, something that's instant, immediate, silver bullet, removes all that stuff, and you can get to that state of more enlightened awareness much quicker. So, can you tell me a little bit about how Neuro Reset came into being, and where was it in the days of BP that you began to develop it and hone it for application in organizations? Tell me a little bit about the story behind how that came to be.
That's a very good question, because I wasn't aware of it much until I started like really running with executives and spending time. It was at the time when I was doing some language training, cross-cultural training, sharing my insights on things to help them understand how things are done, for example, in Russia through their joint venture. And then I realized that they really enjoyed being with me, maybe for something else, not necessarily just for the information that I would share, but just being with me and connecting with me. And I never really paid much attention until much later, when I realized that apparently something is happening when we're having this face-to-face conversation, and there is some, well, people say it's just the chemistry, but it goes beyond that. Because you have to understand, if you're an executive, you don't care much about chemistry between people and all that, because you're too busy to focus on the emotional element of running your business. Like you said, David, yes, sometimes you get this toxic concoction of fear and pressures and deadlines, and push people around, make sure they deliver. So So, but I was looking at this element that probably had something to do with me talking to them. And then I started like really understanding that probably it had to do with the, maybe let's say, a linguistic element of it. The way I sound to them apparently must have triggered something in them, because there was this element of getting slightly entranced or maybe focused more on a higher level of consciousness. It was actually, by the way, in parallel, it was realized by some of my partners in Germany, who promoted me to be one of the speakers for Thomson Reuters events. So when I would speak in front of 3,000-4,000 professionals, that would be the same effect. So they kind of told me at the time, like, well, that's the reason we kind of brought you up to speed on doing that before a large audience, for you to do your little, yeah. So that's how I realized that apparently the way I resonate with people, it was happening through some auditory means. Okay,
Right.
not just me being passionate about what I talk,
Well, that was my
about. It
experience when we
apparently
that
had
was
something to do.
yeah, that was my experience when we first met.
Yes.
I mean, I've meditated for 35 years. I've been in sync with kind of that deeper part of myself. And what I noticed when we spoke is right away I felt this sense of calmness and centeredness that just kind of flooded over me, and this opening that happened. I can't even explain and describe what that opening was. I probably should have journaled more about it the day we met, but that's what I'm noticing. So it is coming through your vocal, qualities and the resonance of
Yeah.
frequency, or the resonance through your auditory that way. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
So yeah, it's called equanimity, and this is the term, what you're describing. This idea of tranquility and calmness that engulfs you. And this is actually, it's a term borrowed, I think, from the Buddhist,
hmm yeah.
glossary,
It's a great word.
because that's pretty
Equanimity
much,
is something we
yeah,
need
it's a
more
great
of these
word.
days.
Absolutely, absolutely. But even that element alone, it was pretty cherished by a lot of people, because if you are able to become that centered, just to be in the eye of the storm with all the things around you are happening, and you're running your shop as an executive. It's a lot. It's a lot, because it helps you weather like those challenges of the day, and focus and be completely detached from anything that would otherwise cause other people to become reactive, right? And create a lot of other issues and problems, in interpersonal dealings. So this is this element. Now, it's definitely, um, you know, going back to this idea of a silver bullet. Okay, if let's assume for a second that this is something that activates our nervous system just by focusing on my voice, that creates this whole idea about silver bullet. Okay, well, he's not pushing any of my buttons. He's not trying to manipulate me psychologically
Right.
to create a certain effect, because we are used to that other people doing that to us, right, on a daily basis. The media, colleagues, friends use various ways to manipulate us for gain or
Right.
maybe for other things, right?
Right. Right.
So, but this is the idea. It's interesting that, okay, all it takes is for you to be present and be exposed to a certain audio thing that
Right.
already triggers something in you, and the process starts. So I think that's where we're talking about the neural reset. That's how it came to be, with your help as well, because you provided a lot of very useful insights, you know,
Right.
based on
Well,
your
I mean,
career as an
as soon as
executive coach.
I've been looking for years, because I knew that Bob Anderson had created he created one of the biggest gifts in the leadership development industry I think we've seen to date, and that he understood that the rise it is not it's not a matter of doing something different. It's about being something different, and out of that beingness comes a different kind of doing. like when the operating system of the human being is upgraded, you developed a higher state of consciousness. Let's say in Bob's case, in the creative level, which is where leadership resides in the consciousness journey, like it boots up at that creative level. That occurs, and that's everything else happens around that, right? And so what you're in a sense saying is that and what I've seen in the work with my clients so far is almost an automatic switch. Or if we had one client that was already in the creative realm, I would have assessed her as the creative realm, and she popped maybe even higher than that in the experience. And that. So the current iteration of it, where you actually sit with you for 2 1-hour sessions, maybe they're a little longer than hour sessions, depending on the client, that creates this reset. What is occurring in that reset that is occurring that allows kind of what you say is that the person, once they go through the reset, they reset their nervous system back to like their 10-year-old self or whatever, where before the junk was put in, but they retain the wisdom, the experience, and the capabilities that they've gained through their career and through their education, right? So they have all the good stuff remains that they collected along the way, and all the bad stuff they collect along the way that doesn't work for them anymore gets taken out, and they're in more of a state of mind that allows them to leverage their capabilities more powerfully. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it's fair to say. I'll probably even add one thing, because one of the people I tried to work with in the early days, it's been like 2.5 years. He just circled back to me because it took him that long to process the experience of the neural reset, because we have to understand that the mind that we have keeps fighting this overhaul, this experience, right? Because the psyche has undergone this deep transformation, whereas our mind is dealing with the aftermath. Like, oh, what's going on? Where's my junk? Where's this negative blockage that I integrated?
Right. Got it.
Somewhere in the back of the mind. Yes.
Right. So that's why we've determined that follow-up coaching is so important, because they're completely in a new territory. Their mind hasn't caught up yet. So you almost need somebody to kind of keep that mind in check and keep them focused on the right things so the mind can catch up. And when that catch up happens, that's when full integration occurs. Is that right? So when the mind catches up,
that's right.
We're here. This is a new place. I agree.
Yes.
I now concur.
Yes.
All that stuff in the past is no more. And I'm now here in the moment with this new way of being. Right.
That's true. That's why your role is critical, because what I've observed so far, it takes people definitely longer than 1 year to deal with their new version of themselves. And you asked, you made that comment. It's like, what happens in people's system? Well, it's very simple. Okay, we meet 2 criteria that people normally want to be met. Like, this experience is impersonal. So it's basically, it's like the storytelling format. I just talk, people just sit back, they don't have to interact with me much.
Or they can engage you in a conversation of interest to them. It doesn't really matter what you talk about, right? You could talk about anything.
No, that's just for the purity of the experiment, I just realized the best way to make it work. You do have a bit of a small talk at the very beginning to establish the so-called limbic resonance with people so that you're on the same page. But it's best not to have any verbal interaction after. Yes, it's got to be ongoing. Why? Because through the auditory cortex, when people begin to process the sounds and the speech, actually basically my speech, right? That starts triggering the so-called synaptic plasticity, this neuronal transformation. And people's brain and the nervous system reacts to that in a very positive manner by, it's actually based on the Hebbian rule, which is a Donald Hebb, this Canadian guy who wrote a book about that back in 1949. The neurons that work together, they fire together, right? It's basically the idea that the moment you trigger that, it starts happening, but it has to last long enough so that the system starts working itself, patching itself up. So this is the most important thing. Now, two things that are really key. It's impersonal. And the second thing, I'm not doing anything to people. It's people's bodies and minds and the psyche and the nervous system that react to my voice and start shedding the old skin. They start shedding that blockage themselves. So my idea is like, I'm just there to be as a catalyst for that change.
Right, but because that core self, this is the other thing they don't really ever necessarily articulate in self-help or in coaching. That core self is already perfect, perfect, ready to go. There's no need for you to go to school to get that power. It's already in you, and that's the thing that's missing, is that engagement of that true self within ourselves. And what I hear you saying is that somehow through listening to you, that the skin of the snake or the whatever blocks them from being more connected to that truer self is not, they can't hold up in whatever the exchange is happening. So the true self now more effortlessly comes forward. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's fair to say. But it's really important because you're right. We did talk previously about there's got to be an experience of some sort. It could be spiritual, whichever dub it, in a way you dub it, right? But it has to be a very, like something that's going to shake you to the core. So as a result, you start doing some reflection on yourself, right? Okay, I've gone through this experience. Now I've got some mind shift or got some shift, and I have to attend to that. So this is what we are having, in this situation. And you're absolutely right. The core, the entire mechanism of self-healing is in us, but it's buried deeply. It's not like we can do it ourselves to ourselves. This is this real misconception or a fallacy, like that people normally think about. Oh, I can self-transform. I can self-heal. I can do things. Usually it's external factors that influence us. And as a result, the way we respond to them, lead us to further, enlightenment along the way.
Yeah, very good. Well, and I think we've begun quite a course today that we've been on, and we've talked about what is possible for a human being. And what stands in the way of that tends to be things we've collected over the course of our lifetime that were not very useful. And actually, well, they might have been useful at the time we collected them. They helped us survive, but then they were retained in the nervous system and the brain, and that they're the things that are slowing us down. And what we've also noticed is that, a lot of, and I would say not everything, I'm not saying 100%, but much of the self-help and coaching industry has driven us in a certain way away from that, because it shines the carrot in front of us, or puts the carrot in front of us, but it doesn't have us look at the ground and all the obstacles that are in the way. And then when we start going down the path, we bump into the obstacles and we give up, then we feel worse about ourselves because we didn't follow the thing consistently, right? So it's what it's saying is that the journey to higher maturity has some challenges in it, has some friction in it. You've got to be willing to, if you do it right, and what we also said is being in awareness is key, but that's a long journey, and you have to be willing to take the knocks of that journey that can be pretty intense. Or there's another way, and the way that you talked about, that there is a way, and we are, in the Institute of Reform, we're open to finding similar things of your gift. We haven't found anything yet that allows us to unfold that much quicker, because we don't have a lot of time left in the world to do that. We need our species to mature, and specifically we're talking about the launching of greater leadership in the world. And you talked about this earlier before we got on the thing about, why leaders? Why are we focused on leaders? And I want to also say, this is not, this sounds like an advertisement in a certain way, it is, but it's important to get this out, that this is available because the world needs it right now, right? That's a lot of why I'm doing this podcast. But there's something about, you were talking about before we started, where if why leaders? So why are you so focused on leaders versus, I mean, there's a lot of people that benefit from the reset. What about leaders draws you to want to support them versus another clientele?
Yes, it's a good question because, yes, if you look around, there could be so many people who really in need for something to lift them, right,
Right.
from the situation they are. But we have to be also careful because it's our business leaders in this world, not political leaders, but business leaders, because what they have those qualities that will shape and change the course of humanity. They've got the intelligence, they've got the skills, and they've got the grit and the fortitude to take us there. Can you imagine if you reignite these people so that they become a better version of themselves, leading us to a better future? That would be huge. So what you and I are doing, we're just trying to really help on the way.
I mean, I tell my clients this all the time. You have no idea what while your results and cruising profitability and market share are all highly valuable. I mean, the best leaders that I know most value helping and touching people around them and empowering them to have, to have a better life. And of course, when they do that, they get a return on investment from that and the effort that those people put into their jobs and creating value. So it's a circle. It goes in a circle. And that's true that leaders have the ability. And I mentioned the last podcast that I did that, Edelman's Trust Index that comes out every year now says that corporate leaders are the most trusted, maybe other than the military, they're the most trusted people in the world. The government is no longer trusted. The media is, not no longer trusted. They're trusted to be more divisive than unitive, that's for sure. But they're not trusted as somebody that's going to bring us together. They're tearing us. The media, the mainstream media, is tearing us apart. So we need people in the. The question will become, as we wrap up today, is what is going to, leaders by them simply doing their job that they're in currently, with the reset, can do a lot of good. They're going to affect the world in a way that they can't even imagine. When they're operating at a higher level, whether it's through reset or through some other means of development that human beings still go through, and it still happens for them, right? So that they're going to have a better impact on everything, even beyond what they know.
Right? Well, what you're talking about here, this situation, we're talking about the ripple effect. So can you imagine that, teams that work, or direct reports that work with those enlightened leaders in a good sense, enlightened. I mean, like they don't have to be imposing things on other people, but, their inner change will generate that ripple effect for their teams. And, when I come from the industry of the business ethics and compliance, we always talked about, tone at the top, like those leaders set the tone for everybody else. But this one is, goes much deeper, because we're talking about leading the teams in the times of global crisis. Because right now, I mean, it's everybody's being tested on so many levels, to keep their business, stay the course, and survive in the face of the adversity that we're having today.
Well, and that goes again, unfazed under fire, right? We want leaders to understand what's possible. We want every human being to understand what's possible, right, for themselves, but specifically leaders, because they are the people that can actually pull people together to solve the problems that we're facing, and they also have the business understanding. They have the business acumen that they bring, along with a higher consciousness, is a big solution solver. That visionary leader gets ignited, we have new solutions for the problems that we think we have today. And right now, we're not seeing that. We're not seeing vision. Visionaries are out there. No doubt there's entrepreneurs that are doing amazing things, but we're not seeing that at a big scale. And we need those leaders that are leading large organizations, mid-sized organizations, and startups to wake up to who they are and to their power, their true power, which is ethical. The other side of what happens with a reset is you get into an ethical mindset that is just natural. It's natural to who we are as human beings. It's unnatural to be unethical, right? So I really appreciate this conversation. We're going to have to we're going to be having you back regularly on the show. But I appreciate the insights you provided today on this, and let's keep the conversations going. And if anybody has any questions about this reset thing, they can certainly get in touch with me, and we can talk more about it. But I appreciate your time today, Anatoly.
Well, thank you, David. Yes, this discussion is very necessary because it may help a lot of people make sense of their own journey.
Right, exactly. So we'll be continuing next week. I'm going to be focusing on kind of dovetailing this to talk about the key step that one must take to kind of develop as a leader, which is really their own self-leadership. So that'll be in our next show. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today and taking the time to listen and be with us. And hope you have a great rest of your week. And we'll see you next time. So thanks for joining on Unfazed Under Fire. I'm David Kragos, and you have a great day.